Show some love for DJ Puzzle, everyone watching out there. Welcome to the live stream. Thanks so much, DJ Puzzle. If y'all want to show some love, check out DJ Puzzle at PU22L3 on IG. And we got a tip jar going for DJ Puzzle too. So if you enjoy the vibes, he'll be back later for when we do the cocktail break mid-show. Welcome everyone to Accented IRL. My name is Khoi Nguyen. I'm the producer for the show. I'm a part of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, who's one of the co-sponsors for this show. For those of y'all who have been joining us through our Accented journey so far, we started this series to really be able to connect people globally during a time when we've never really ever felt so far away from each other, right? We started hosting our show and featuring authors like Nguyen Phan Quế Mai and Phúc Jung, the author of Saigon, right? We talked about Vietnamese representation. We've talked about Southeast Asian food. We talked about theater arts. We had a rock star on the show. And now we're so glad to be here on Facebook Live and YouTube Live with y'all in sponsorship, in partnership with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. And, just as a quick heads up, y'all might have seen let me pull up the slide really quickly. Y'all might have seen our Facebook event. We'll be putting out the Facebook event for all of the events that are coming out this spring 2021 soon. We have an incredible lineup for y'all, but for today, our show is a night of poetry. So, I don't know about y'all, but with the, 130 of y'all watching here, it'd be pretty poetic if you could share what's going on here. Make sure when you post make sure you take pictures, right? Take pictures of the live stream, take pictures of the conversation, post on Instagram, tag at WeAreDVAN and the Smithsonian APA Center, so that we can reshare whatever it is that you're feeling, how you're getting into the vibe, how we getting really into the mood for a night of poetry, right? So that we can spotlight y'all as well, because it's about how we build community with each other, and it's about how we have these intimate and meaningful and thoughtful conversations about culture, heritage, and narrative, right? I also want to say that all of the books featured during today's show will be available from our bookstore partner, the East Wind Books of Berkeley, so check them out. We'll also have a live auction, which we'll announce a little bit later. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce y'all to the man, the host of our show for this series, the Accented Dialogues in Diaspora series. Y'all know him as the author of The Sympathizer, Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, The Refugees, and Race and Resistance, Literature, Politics in Asian America. He also has a book that's going to be coming out next month, The Committed, the sequel to The Sympathizer. So y'all please show some love and give it up for Viet Thanh Nguyen.
Thanks for the intro, Philip. Thanks. Good. Thanks for the intro, Philip. Thanks for the music, DJ Puzzle. I'm still stuck on Depeche Mode. Just can't get enough. Formative moment for me. And at that time, when I Just Can't Get Enough came out, I was still writing poetry. Thank God I am no longer doing that. I figured out I was a terrible poet by the time I was in college. And so I'm really humbled tonight to be hosting a night of poetry with 4 really great poets who have a totally different grasp of the language than I do. And the first poet that we're going to introduce tonight is Cathy Linh Che. She is the author of Split, winner of the Kundiman Poetry Prize, the Norma Farber First Book Award from the Poetry Society of America, and the Best Poetry Book Award. She is also the executive director of Kundiman, an arts organization for Asian American writers. Check them out at kundiman.org. Welcome, Cathy. All right, so far our age is showing. No problem with that. It's just a number, folks. Our second poet for the night is Diana Khoi Nguyen. She's the author of The Chaplet, Unless, and the debut poetry collection Ghost of, a finalist for the National Book Award and the LA Times Book Prize. It received the 2019 Kate Tufts Discovery Award and the Colorado Book Award. She just received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome, Diana. All right, I have a feeling we're all about the same age. Okay, our next writer is Bao Phi, the author of 2 books of poetry, Song I Sing and Thousand Star Hotel, and 3 children's books, A Different Pond, My Footprints, and Hello, Mandarin Duck. He has received numerous honors, including a Caldecott Honor, the Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Organization, Asian American Writers. Check them out at kundiman.org. All right, I'm hearing myself talking. And the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. Please welcome Bao Phi.
Behind movie scenes, behind those movie screens, Asher Bosley, she's the one that keeps the dream alive.
All right. Last, certainly not least, is Paul Tran, the recipient of a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation and its Discovery Boston Review Poetry Prize. They are the author of the forthcoming book, All the Flowers Kneeling. He, too, has just received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. Welcome, Paul.
It's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining men. Amen. I'm gonna go out.
Well, I'm pretty sure Paul is the youngest one here, and he picked the oldest song, so it messes up all of this notion of chronology. We have one more guest to introduce. That is Thuy Phan. She is our resident mixologist. We are so fortunate to have her. She came up with a drink just for this occasion. And I just want to say, I believe Philip and I did not get our cocktails because of the storm that's happening. I feel this is really unfair because the storm prevented the delivery of your cocktail, Thuy, but it did not prevent Ted Cruz from leaving and coming back from Mexico. Something is wrong here. But can you tell us about the cocktail that you sent to our lucky recipients?
Sure. Nice to be here. Happy New Year. Chúc mừng năm mới to everyone. So the cocktail is called the Firecracker, and it's that inspired. Since it was just last week, I thought, why not celebrate the whole week long? And in it, there's mandarin oranges, lime, just to balance out the liquor part. And the liquor base, you could make it into a whiskey sour-like drink with whiskey, or you can do mezcal or tequila if you like margaritas. What makes it spicy is the Thai chili pepper in it that you shake with it, and a little bit of the ginger honey to give it an extra zing. So, yeah, enjoy. This is for the new year, and hopefully it'll start your year off with a little fiery crackle. So enjoy. Cheers.
That really sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. Chúc mừng năm mới, everybody. I brought my bottle of writer's tears, which seems appropriate for the occasion. I've shed quite a lot of those tears, but here's to you, to all the writers, and to all the beautiful words that you're bringing into the world and to our audience out there.
Cheers.
Our audience is coming, and I'm pretty sure it's coming from a lot more places, but not everybody chipped into the comments. But so far, I know we have people coming from San Jose, San Francisco, Indonesia. That's Gui Mai, unless there's other people coming from Indonesia. Welcome, Gui Mai. She's the author of the fabulous novel, The Mountain Sing. Charlotte, San Diego, Long Beach, Oakland. For some reason, we have a lot of Kansas people here today because I'm seeing Wichita and Topeka, maybe other places. Some place called Prairie Village. Sounds like it should be in Kansas, maybe not. West Virginia, Maryland, Richmond, Toronto, Tennessee, and Bonners Ferry, Idaho. So if I didn't call out your place, just toss it into the chat. But I'm so thrilled to be here with our 4 poets tonight. And again, I just want to repeat that I'm a really terrible poet. And I learned that lesson early, so I am always awed by the presence of poets. And recently, we as a nation experienced poetry because President Biden got inaugurated, and he invited, or actually it was actually Dr. Jill Biden, his partner, who invited the inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman, to come and deliver her poem. And so I thought it would just be great to get your reactions to to Amanda Gorman's poem, her performance, and just the very idea of having poetry at these kinds of public events like a presidential inauguration. Cathy, why don't we start with you?
Well, I want to say that I think, well, poetry can be very public and poetry can be very private. And I will say from my experience, so the wonderful poets here, Paul and Bao and Diana, they're all amazing performers. And there's just a deep history with poetry and public performance, and it's a way to connect to others. So I had people reach out to me on that day because they know I'm a poet, just because they saw a poet on the kind of like one of the largest stages. So I thought it was really exciting. But yeah, I want to hear from, these other performers, because I'm very curious what they think.
Well, I mean, the two you're referring to, I know at least that Paul and Bao have both been slam poets. I'm not sure if Diana has done that at all, but this is the first time, Amanda Gorman was or is a performance poet, a slam poet. I'm pretty sure she's the first one of that kind to be an inaugural poet, but you don't have to be a slam poet to give a reaction here. How about others? What did you think of Amanda Gorman's performance and her poem?
I want to say that I'm just so deeply admiring of Amanda Gorman, especially because I have seen her through her time as a young poet, as a National Youth Poet Laureate, which was a program founded by Urban Word NYC, where I was able to work while in New York. And to see her be the National Youth Poet Laureate and to now be the inaugural poet is just stunning. And I thought a lot about her performance in particular because I remember being in high school in Miss Shilin Bookrin's history class when Elizabeth Alexander was the inaugural poet for Barack Obama, and how we took the time in that class to watch her performance, read the poem, analyze the poem, and now to see Amanda's performance and to teach that poem in class to young people who are her age, who are also starting out as writers, and to see the fire she possesses be lit in them, that is near indescribable. So I don't know, just deeply in admiration, deeply grateful, and so happy that spotlight shined on her that day.
I just want to point out that, given what you just said, that she came from Los Angeles. I'm very proud of her since I'm from I live in Los Angeles, and she was the Youth Poet Laureate for Los Angeles, selected in a competition through the LA Public Library. She came up through a local nonprofit writing program called Write Girl. So to me, she's an embodiment of what it is that so many of us do in terms of writing programs and poetry education and things like that. Diana, I know you're a professor as well. I mean, this is sort of incredible that Joe Biden decided not to invite sort of an establishment poet, as great as they are, but instead went with a youth poet instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to think about that, the future is really in like the young revolutionary, to make that kind of statement. And I was really struck, Paul, by what you said about the spotlight being on Amanda and like that yellow, right? Everything, it wasn't just the verbal or the oral, but it was the nonverbal too. Like the whole composition. And like, I also kind of nerded out. Like I was so deeply grateful for the first person plural. Sorry, this is to get like into the text, and that it has future tense. A lot of poems, most poems, my poems do not use the future tense, right? Like I'm just stuck in the past. We're just trying to figure out how to move forward from the present, but that there was hope. Right, that it ends on this future we will. And I was like, yes, So I think that all of that was like, just like so pitch perfect for that particular occasion.
mean, she was working in a very particular format, the inaugural, which is extremely rare. And she was writing a poem that clearly, from my point of view, doubled as a political speech or a political performance. I mean, she invoked her own presidential ambitions at some point. But it's not a poem in like the confessional sense or a lyrical sense. It's a poem meant for a public occasion. And as you were saying, Diana, gesturing towards the future, towards hope, which for many of us is something that we felt that we desperately needed. Now, Bao, you are a poet who's also a political poet. I mean that in the best sense possible. How did you respond to this dimension of her work as a public political piece that was there for a certain kind of occasion?
It was beautiful. It was beautiful and a long time coming. It was overdue. I admire her greatly. I don't have the privilege of knowing her, but I'll tell you a funny story. I started writing what we call spoken word poetry or slam poetry in high school as a part of speech team when I was a sophomore. Now, this was way back in like 1991 or 1992. And I based my poetry off of rhetoric back then, political speeches. You know what I mean? I combined the craft of poetry with like speechifying, basically. And I just remember through so many years back then, a lot of people said we weren't poets, or we weren't actually we weren't even good speakers in terms of the speech team. We got pushback saying, that's not really speech. These are just like political statements or rants or whatever. There's no art, there's no speech to it. And to see now in our day and age, a non-white young person, at the highest state of the presidency, delivering this beautiful work, I think it's just really great for everyone to really kind of like witness that and be a part of that. And the really quick thing I'll make is a joke that, we can be very critical of the Democratic Party, and we should be, but we got to give them credit for having much better taste in inaugural poets than Republicans. Because, I mean, in our lifetime, they had Maya Angelou, Richard Blanco, Elizabeth Alexander, right? Amanda Gorman. Republicans had, they literally, during my lifetime, have never had an inaugural poet, so.
Right. I mean, there's certainly the sense that the liberals and the leftists are better in some ways at the arts in general, into whether we're talking about poetry or whether we're talking about music. We have better, musicians at these kinds of political events, and of course movies and so on. Now, one of the things that happened with Amanda Gorman's poem, I think, was that the response was overwhelmingly laudatory, but nevertheless, there was a little bit of a subtext of what Bao brought up, which is, it's not really poetry. There's these kinds of technical problems with it. I'm happy personally that no one who I'm a Facebook friend with took this stance, but that did circulate, and there was at least one public newspaper piece from England that said, "Hey, this is not great poetry." But it's sort of hard to separate that response, as Bao implied, from the person who is making the criticism and the person who is giving the poem. And I'm just kind of curious, you all are working at very high levels of poetry. Some of you also work in these registers of slam and performance poetry. All of you have overlapped or are presently in academia. There are all these different kinds of expectations about what poetry is, should be, and should do. I'm just kind of curious, given what Bao said, whether you ran into some of these loaded expectations in your own career.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to take up stories. I don't want to take up, I don't want to take up too much space because I think I've already talked about it. But my own personal experience. So first of all, my reaction, my knee-jerk reaction to people criticizing her is basically "fuck you." But if we want to kind of get deeper into it, okay, no artist is above criticism, right? And that's something I learned, going through college on full scholarship, being a creative writing class where I was the only one doing the type of poetry that I was writing at the time, and hearing a lot of those remarks constantly in workshop, I had to develop a very thick skin, right? But I also had to develop an ear for what is actually constructive criticism that I could use, and what is just people hating. You know what I mean? Because, again, all artists can improve. I can improve. I'm a better poet now than I was back then. So it's not about criticism, but not all criticism is worth keeping and worth hearing. And I think for those of us from marginalized communities, right, like we have to fine tune that even more, because so much of it can have baggage that is really not about the work, but is about, you know, these preconceived Eurocentric notions of what art is.
I agree so much with what Bao said. And often, particularly when I saw the criticism with Amanda's poems, I thought, do these people know the history in which their criticism is rooted? If they are saying that the poem is not a poem because it does not deploy the poetic devices they are familiar with, are they aware that those poetic devices, say rhyme, say meter, were developed because of empires who commissioned poems to commemorate the imperial acts they carried out, to commemorate the ruling class, right? And those devices were forged in order for those epic poems to be memorized, to be easily recited, to test time. Do they also know that what they are alleging is as poetry, and what isn't poetry has deeply racial dimensions, deeply classed dimensions? And even now, when we are talking about her performance over her poem, the idea of someone being a performer and not a poet has deeply racialized dimensions that, you know, Bao alluded to. And as a poet who started out in slam, I faced regularly. People did not want me to be a poet. They wanted me to be a performer. They wanted me to be a storyteller. And I think so much of my career growing up has been to assert, no, I am definitely a poet. And Amanda asserted that, even just what Diana pointed out, that her poem used the future tense, the subjunctive mood, meant that she had to navigate and modulate between grammatical mood in her poem. That modulation, that's poetic. And I'm not sure when people make these allegations or criticisms that they understand what they are actually trying to say and are trying to hide it by saying something else, which at the end of the day, I think that is not my problem. It's 2021. I'm going to mind my own business and leave them to their problems themselves. But towards the defense of what Amanda gave us, that gift, it is poetry. And there's no argument with that.
I mean, we've talked about race here. Certainly that's a major factor, race, age, status, all of this. But gender is clearly an issue that came up in the response to her work. So, I mean, I just finished reading a biography of Sylvia Plath called Red Comet by Heather Clark, and it is number one, it's 1,100 pages. But number two, it's just you know, having this world recreated of what Sylvia Plath was facing as a poetess, a woman poet in this very masculine world of poetry in the 1950s, plus the world of patriarchy. On top of that is really, really depressing to think about what she had to overcome. So I don't know. I mean, Cathy, Diana, do you have more to add, either on the dimension of gender or just in general what we've been talking about in terms of what Amanda Gorman is facing and what the response to Gorman tells us about the state of poetry?
I don't have one specific to gender. I think people are going to attack the vessel, no matter the vessel. And just on my end, where I'm in a classroom space now, right? Like when I was in an MFA program, or just like in my PhD program, you know, nobody else in that program for poetry looked like me. And I suspect many of us here are quite familiar with that experience. And so when we get comments that are so exclusionary, that's just plain snobbery. It's like, excuse you. You know, I mean, but it's also like, is the instructor going to facilitate an inclusive space? No, they did not. So me now, I am able to be in a space where I can allow for all the possibilities. Like, do whatever you want is what I say. It's a poetic set of mind. however they want to manifest, even if it's a non-verbal poetics, you know. And I think that's a kind of subversion that I can do in this particular moment that can prepare for readers and viewers out there to see Amanda and be like, yes, to be grateful. Like, why negativity? You know, and that's also a kind of product empire. I mean, it doesn't do anything.
Thanks, Diana. Cathy, do you have anything else?
I just want to say I met Paul when Paul was 21 years old, a little younger than Amanda Gorman. And for me, I was writing very personal, a little experimental, lyrical, narrative work. And Paul, Paul, were you at the retreat was G there too? Yeah, G Yamazawa. And so the people who've taught me the most have been the ones who have been spoken word poets, highly experimental poets, people who stretch you outside of where you're coming from. So I think that there is a lot of room and space. So for instance, Diana might not be identified as a performance poet, but is certainly a performer, and her performances are incredible to me. I think a lot of poets these days, there maybe it still is, but there used to be wider silos where somebody might say something like, oh, that was a political poem, but oh, it was actually good. Or there's sort of a lot of schools or spaces where you feel like things could not converge. But I think there's a lot of space now for somebody who is political, spoken word, on the page, highly experimental, and to understand that we're in a space now that, and it's, whatever the genre is, I think sometimes what people are arguing with is an institutionalized understanding of what poetry or art looks like. And I think that there is, if you look far enough back, you're going to find, beef with any type of poet out there. You can go and work, you can pull a Frost poem and workshop it, and people are going to say all sorts of, oh, this is a cliche. The rhythm here is not, whatever it is. I think that exists. But I guess ultimately what I got out of Amanda Gorman's work is just that she connected to so many people. People were astounded. Sometimes there are poets who perform and the audience is kind of like tuning out, but everybody kind of sat up straight in their seat and started tuned in. So that was really an incredible moment for, I think, all of us.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Cathy, and not me, since you're the poet. We'll get to, by the way, the act of writing poetry and your individual poems and all that. But I did want to talk about the performance aspect of Amanda Gorman's work and then what it means in general for poetry. And Cathy, you said sometimes the performances of poetry in live settings are not always that inspiring. And unfortunately, I have been the victim of such non-performances in poetry spaces. More often than not, they are the more traditional establishment poets. Like I went to a Pulitzer Prize winning famous poet's reading, and the man never looked up from the page of his book. And afterwards I was informed some poets believe that the words should simply speak for themselves on the page. I'm like, in what world are we living in where the poem is not supposed to be performed, given that there's always sort of an oral, both senses of oral dimension to the poem. And Amanda Gorman, being a young, energetic slam poet, really delivered in front of a national audience by making her words come alive and connecting with the overwhelming majority of the audience, most of whom were not poets. So I'm just really interested in your take on the performative dimension of poetry, how you feel when you're up in front of an audience, because not everybody's going to feel comfortable doing what Gorman did. Not everybody wants to be a slam poet. We have a couple of slam poets here. So there's different ways of performing, of speaking your poetry. And I just want to open up that space for you to talk about what that means for you, either both as a poet and a performer, and also, as a member of an audience of poetry, as I'm sure you've attended many more poetry readings than I have. But let's start with Paul, because you have been a slam poet. I read that you've been a coach for slam poetry teams. You know, and then you mentioned that you were also involved in this in high school. So I'm just kind of curious about your relationship to the performative aspect of poetry.
Thank you, Viet. I will try to keep this as succinct as possible because there's much I want to say. Where I will begin is with a joke that I tell my students. I have this belief, longstanding belief, that no one wakes up thinking to themselves, I want to hear a queer trans Vietnamese American story today, that is what's going to get me through my life. And so whenever I entered the room for a poetry slam, that competition in which poets had 3 minutes to recite an original poem without props, and were judged by 5 random members of the audience who are often pulled off the street, who give us a score 0 to 10, I had to make that room not only believe that what I said had value, but that they also wanted me against the other amazing competitors of the game to win, because I had to receive the requisite scores to move from round to round. And I was not going to do that unless that room was on my side. And for all those who say that slam poets write lesser poems, there's actually an incredible amount of knowledge we have to deploy in writing such a poem. In the institutional world of poetry, we talk about prosody, which is the study of how rhyme and meter come together in the creation of a poem. Performance poets have to know that. A poem has to sound good to an audience. We have to know how repetition works, how to modulate between different diction, different registers. We have to know how to make something abstract and concrete at the same time, because the poem can only be experienced once, and then it's immediately scored. It is not like a poem on the page that can be read and experienced again and again in the privacy of the reader's life. This is a one-time ephemeral experience. And people are busy. And oftentimes these poetry slams happen in bars where people are drunk. So you have to get people who are drunk to care. And I just think that knowledge is often denied from us. And there's such a, I don't know, I will say next, there's a way in which a poet who performs their own poem is also the vessel of their poem. Unlike on a page where the poet and their body is not there, when you see a poet on stage, they are their poem. And so everything about how they look, how they sound, what they're wearing, what their face does, if they use choreography or not, all of that is present. And I don't know, I just learned so much from that experience about how to make my poem matter to somebody. And I think a lot of times when people are writing on the page, and especially poets who come to the art form from a position of privilege, by which I mean they have never had anyone contest that what they say has value, there is something about having to be the vessel of your poem that makes you acutely aware whether or not people care about what you are saying, whether or not you have reached your audience. And so slam taught me a lot about how to make my story matter to another. And so when I teach my students, I say there's 2 journeys. So the journey for the writer, and there's a journey that the poem has to take for a reader. What does the reader need? And in poetry, it's very taboo often for us to think about the reader of the poem, because we want the art to be somehow pure, but purity is a myth. And there are things that we do in workshop, in revision, to make the poem salient and eternal for a reader, that I feel, and this might be my spicy take, that performance poets know a little bit more about. I'm just gonna say, but that's the end of my my time.
Muted me. I think someone in the comments said that this is a TED Talk, Paul. So you should definitely do this and deliver this to a larger audience. But I think the point you're raising about audiences and privileges are really important, because for those of us who come out of communities of color, working class communities, we don't have the luxury of poetry on our shelves when we're growing up and things like this. We don't have the privilege and luxury of having parents who are poets and academic poets and all that kind of thing. So when we go listen to poetry or perform poetry, we know we have to capture the audience's attention. We have to earn that, as you're saying. Now, Diana, you're a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. You're at least partly in the academic world, and in the academic world, you already have a built-in audience once you become a so-called academic poet with a professorial position. You know, you can be invited to a college and give a reading, and everybody has to show up and at least pretend that they care about what's going on. So it's a very different environment in a lot of ways. I don't know if you have a slam background or a performance background, but I'd love to hear the contrast between these two worlds that are represented here by you and Paul.
Are you guys able to hear me? I just switched to headphones. Apparently my audio got possessed by aliens.
All good.
Which is kind of lovely. I love it, which is, you know, embrace the extra, the extraterrestrial. But to answer this question, absolutely. So this week, I actually was at 2 different universities, oftentimes classrooms or spaces where students who've been assigned to read your book, right, kind of show up. And they're all there with their close reading, you know, of your work. And the first thing I think for me is I want them to know I'm a human being, right? That I am not the person that they've constructed through what they think poetry is, which is so removed from human life, you know. So no, I don't come from a slam background, but I share Paul's. When Paul was talking, I was thinking, you know, like, yes, the poet is the vessel, the poet is the page, but also like the poet is the instrument through which the language and the experience like flows through like breath, right? And it comes out through our mouth, but like our whole body resonates. And so it's really like a whole kind of body experience. So when people aren't just reading work anymore, but they're listening, if they, you know, in terms of accessibility, if they can see you, it's a totally different experience. And you have to attune yourself to that experience. You have to communicate with your whole body. I really don't know how else to say it, but like, I feel like I've been to readings where it was distracting what the poet's body was doing, because it didn't make sense to what they were saying. Like they had written down, like, now move your arm like this, like it's a stage direction. But there's something like, if you allow for the music of your work to move through your body, the instrument, the body will follow, like organically, naturally, and to allow for that, not to stifle your arms down because you're nervous. And I think there's something about allowing for the resonance, the vibrations, right, the reverb of that feeling, and then the audience will feel it too. It's got a little woo-woo, I just realized, and I've been drinking, but like, no, I think all of that is totally at work. And this goes for non-poet performers, readers too. There's a vibrational that we cannot see that's moving through that space.
No, I absolutely agree. And, you know, a lot of things that we're talking about apply to prose people, as well. I'm a novelist, you know, so I've been to a lot of boring fiction readings too, and just because we're dealing with fiction doesn't mean we're exempt from this performative aspect. Now, Cathy, you are also, you know, in one of the hats that you wear, you are the executive director of the Kundiman workshop, and so you meet a lot of writers. I think they're all Asian American, if I understand right, from the Kundiman mission. And does the question of performance come up in the workshops and the teaching and the discussions that happen at Kundiman?
I want to say, first of all, Bao has taught at Kundiman, and people know Bao as both somebody who they've studied his books, but also as a performer. And so we had an Asian American poetry lecture, and at Tim Yu, who is a professor of Asian American studies and also a poet, will lead the lecture. And so one year we had Marilyn Chin in the room, and she performed, and she just like tore the whole house down. She said, you know who taught me how to, you know, read? It was Janice Mirkatani. And she was just talking about how that's these are some of our roots. That's the thing, you know, Asian American poetry that sprung up in the 70s, really, it sprung up in these kind of like Bridge magazine always had this like folio of poetry. It's always like community writing, but it also came out from this political work that these poets were performing out loud. So it's part of our root, which is incredible to me. And so Bao, he performed his poem, and I was in the corner and I was weeping, and I went up to him afterward and I said, Bao, I've never seen myself so seen. I had that experience with Paul. Paul was also at the retreat and performed. And I remember sitting next to Paul and holding their hand and just saying, you're a genius. So I think that from the root of Kundiman, we always wanted that range of aesthetic to be in the same room. So in the very earliest days, it was always, at least half of the people in that workshop were spoken word artists. And there's Summit used to be, I've never experienced Summit, but I just hear about it. It's a space that Asian Pacific American spoken word artists used to gather. And that was a very important gathering. And on top of that, so I lost my train of thought, but in other words, this to us is a vital and important part of our history of Asian American poetry. You cannot deny that this is our root. So, and not our root, but our future. So yeah, Bao, I want to hear from you because.
Don't worry, I'm getting to Bao. I've saved Bao for the last participant in this round of poetry dating here. Because Bao, you, I believe, number one, Bao has won multiple slam championships in Minnesota and elsewhere. And he was one of the poets in HBO's Russell Simmons Deaf Poetry. And that's when I first encountered Bao. And so you're really awesome at delivering poetry performances. And I believe you may be the only poet ever invited to perform on Paris by Night. Possibly. At least the only English language poet.
Maybe the only English language.
Right. Poet.
Yeah.
Right. Now, and of course, I believe that means that you are redeemed in the eyes of all Vietnamese parents, that you have been able to hold the stage along with all of these, awesome singers and dancers and everything like that. And I believe, Philip, that we might have a clip of Bao on Paris by Night. Is that correct?
My 4-year-old daughter hits me. Her tiny fists, dough balls, socking into my forearm. Since we are trying to teach her consequence, I tell her Daddy has to go sit somewhere else without her until she can apologize and promise to stop hitting Daddy. She's already crying. She runs towards me, arms outstretched. She wants me to pick her up. Hold her. Because I am trying to teach her a lesson, she gives me no choice but to run away from her around the dining room table. And she chases me, blubbering tears, as if she was a war orphan in Vietnam and I was her C-130. A few nights ago, she asked if my daddy lost the war. I want to say, I am made of war, and that means you are too. I want to say I was born inside a halo of gunpowder. No, a silhouette of a circle left by an exploding bomb. No, a snake eating itself. But instead, I take a deep breath and I begin to tell her, "You're ông nội." He fought in a war like many others. And like many others, he did not want to. And that's why I am here. And that's why you are here. And that is why sometimes other people look at us and they don't understand why we are here. And sometimes that makes us feel like we don't know why we are here either. I didn't know how to end that story. Not then, not now. My daughter staring at me, arms open, tears raining, clear napalm down her cheeks. I wonder if my daughter is not as far away from the war as I hope she would be. I wonder what ghosts made of gunpowder and spilt oil and jet stream live in her veins so that she could run at me like this, to test the caliber of my resolve, the buoyancy of my memory, the times my body feels too small to do what I ask it to survive. Her heavy steps leaving bomb craters around the dining room table. These jagged holes that will, through rain, in time, and survivors' hands, grow rice paddies. I pick my daughter up. I hold her. She puts her chin on my shoulder. And through her tears, she sees everything behind me. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn chương trình Paris by Night cho tôi cơ hội thực hiện này.
Wow, that was awesome. All right, you got to tell us what that experience was like for those of us who've never been backstage at Paris by Night.
Thank you. Thank you for showing that. I think the audience was basically kind of like, when is this guy going to be done? Could we move on to the dancers and the people who sing and stuff like that? But everybody there was, the Paris by Night organization, people work so hard. They work so hard. They were very nice, very supportive to me. I'm this poet from Minnesota. I'm nervous as hell. There was somebody running around every 15 minutes with a flashlight and retouching up my makeup. It was abstract. As poets, right? We're not used to that. We're like lucky to be able to go up there and read for 5 minutes, and people are like, "Get the fuck out!" That's usually what it is. It's like, right? And so people were so lovely and hardworking, and you all know how it is. I mean, Philip right now is working the tech, and other people are working the tech, so we can all look good. That's what Paris by Night is like. People just grinding it out and like not sleeping, and it was just for all the things that you already mentioned. It meant a lot to me, especially because my family, like my mom actually tried to use my Paris by Night leverage to like hire a Vietnamese person to help her around the house. It didn't work, but like that's the clout now, I guess. It is a very Joy Luck Club moment. Like if my mom had a magazine and could carry it around and show it around Little Saigon, she would. But it was. Thank you for showing that clip, and all of you all for saying nice words. Y'all know I'm a big fan of you, all of you. It's good to be here. And
honestly, for Vietnamese people, being on Paris by Night is probably better than being the inaugural poet.
Yeah, for sure.
So you made it, Bao.
And my parents did not give a shit when I was on HBO. They did not give a fuck, and they know what HBO is. But they did not care. But then Paris by Night, they're like, okay.
Yeah, because they can't brag about it to their friends and show them the actual DVD. I think it was probably still a DVD at that point.
Yep.
With your performance. But so we've been talking about performance, public spaces, the role of the poet in the public.
Yeah.
And, when we're talking about Vietnamese people, obviously we come from a very literary culture, which I think was literary because being literary was tied to power back in the olden days, and now it's not. So now we care about doctors and engineers instead. So it's sort of a nostalgic thing almost to have a poet up there on the stage of Paris by Night. But in general, I'm just kind of, since you've carved out your career initially as a slam poet and a performance poet, well, how did it feel finally to be able to bring that to a Vietnamese audience? We saw a brief, a frame of how many people were there. It's one thing, I think, to perform to all the other audiences you performed at, but I assume there was something different or special about, this audience of mostly Vietnamese people.
Absolutely. It was very special for me, and it was also nerve-wracking, I think, for reasons that I guess all of you can probably imagine. you know, like I think we probably all to a certain degree know what it's like to be that weird Vietnamese person who writes poetry in English or writes in English, right? Where you feel even like marginalized in your marginalized community, right? But there's also like, and you know, when as you grow up and you develop, you have certain reactions to that, right? Push pull. I brought a lot of that to Paris by Night. Like I was grateful for the experience, but I was very nervous. You know, it was like you. I think you're kind of intimating, Viet. It's kind of like it's like performing in front of like 2,000 people who are your parents or your relatives. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so much pressure. Even if people are like super nice to you, and even if intellectually you understand, right? Like it's not like that. There's that pressure, I think, just because of who I am and how I came up. But it was a great experience. And you know, there are other concerns about Vietnamese American artists, particularly Vietnamese American artists, leftists who perform in front of all Vietnamese audiences, which we can get into later, which I think we probably all can address as well. But if I could kind of actually touch back on a conversation we were having earlier that I wanted to actually ask all of you about, is kind of like this idea of performance, right? And kind of what you were saying, Viet, about prose writers as well, right? Like, to me, the way that I look at it is when you write a poem on a page, that is craft, right? Right? That is craft. When you get on stage and you are about to present your work to an audience, that is also craft, right? Like, for you, like the part of our lives as authors where we have to stand up in front of an audience, like that is craft. Like we actually, to be good at that, we have to work at it. It is an art form to do that. And everyone should do it. Anyone who ever considers standing up in front of an audience should pay attention to that craft, right? But one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is something that I think about that I don't quite have a formal thought about, is as Vietnamese people also, like our Vietnamese language, like our language is tonal. Like when we speak, it's like singing a song, right? Like even like chúc mừng năm mới, like you can't just be like chúc mừng năm mới, like, right? Like you have to pay attention to every syllable that you say in Vietnamese, right? And I wonder if that has an effect on us either consciously or subconsciously as writers when we get up there. That I don't know. What do you all think?
We'd love to hear about it from the other poets. This will be our last round because, as I forewarned everybody in advance, time goes really fast and we're all pressing up on the break. So there's a bunch of things I still have to ask, but we'll see if the audience asks them after the break during the Q&A. But let's respond to Bao's point before we take a break.
There's so much I want to say, but I don't have it all articulated other than I agree that the performance is craft, and I love weaving together everybody's comment. So when Diana was talking about, because I've been in Diana's performances, and there's a participatory aspect of it, and even over Zoom or something, you know that it's an encounter that is very different than the poem on the page being your emissary and somebody having a private encounter with that, and somebody rereading that. That is also a space where the words become enlivened in conversation. However, the live performance is a space where it's true, it's a connection between the body. So we have at the retreat a session taught by Jason Bayani, who's an amazing slam performer, as well as an amazing poet. But I remember watching him do his one-person show, and I was watching him, and I went up to him. I was like, I want to be able to do that. He's like, I can teach you that, to fill the room with your words, to fill the room with your feeling. There's something very magical about that encounter. I think of performance as, for me, this encounter with because I write very personal work, and very traumatic work. It can be about, we all kind of come from war. That is the truth. That's kind of at this moment in time, this generation, we spring forth from that. So, there is a way that what Diana was talking about, it's like people have this idea of what you are from your poetry, but that only presents a part of you. So the things you say in between, the ways that you present your face, I would like banter and joke because I wrote a lot about being a woman who's sexually violated. So I wanted people to know, especially in those days as pre-Me Too, to understand that I'm a whole person. You know, I'm not just this distilled trauma on the page. I'm not just this intergenerational trauma and there's this result of it. So I think that, and I also want to say, I did do a cross-country road trip with Paul, performing from place to place, like in city to city. And it was so hard going, because I was sandwiched between two spoken word artists who were amazing. And then I'm like, and then one's like a visual artist doing like this like performance with like, we had an overhead projector, you know, but, you know, I do a lot of film work at my readings and I do a lot of photography because I feel like the encounter, sometimes I don't want people just to be able to imagine it. I want them to see my family. So I do a lot of work showing my photographs because I feel like I don't want you to like just sort of, you know, I read and then you see Apocalypse Now or some bullshit, you know, like I want my actual my actual family is a bunch of farmers, so they're very brown too. So I want that to be the encounter of what you see when I talk about my fucking family, you know? So yeah, that's all I'll say, but I'll toss it back to y'all.
Well, Paul, you were on that trip.
I was, and I think the most contributive way I can extend what Cathy said is that performance or on the page. For me, it's a matter of being believed, of asserting that I am a real person with real things that happen to me, with real things that happen to my family and to the people that I love. And so often when I tell people about my experience on and off the poem, if I tell them that my father molested me, if I tell them that I was raped at 21, they say that's unbelievable. And the fact that they can't believe it contributes to the power of the trauma that occurred. It's unbelievable that something like that could happen to a body like mine. And is that why the dean of the college didn't believe me? Is that why the police department didn't believe me? Is that why the abuser was able to get away with it? I'm sure that is part of it. And in poetry, how can a speaker be believed? How can the voice and the way the poem is made render a reader under its enchantment? If we're talking, again, in the space of performance, there are things we do to make sure that we are believed. Like Bao said, can we use our voice, our tone, our body to impress upon an audience that what we are saying is true, that they should listen, that there is something we can do together as an audience, as a room, to remedy that? Yes. I don't think that when I was in my graduate program, the number of times I saw writers who wrote for themselves and who did not care about a reader, who did not care about being believed, whose challenge in the world was not asserting that they were a real person, those poems did not succeed. And yes, in turn, they said that I got, you know, the prizes or the attention or whatever by writing diversity poems, by writing trauma poems. I don't care what they said, but I know why they said it. But they were misinformed. They missed the mark with their agitation. What I was able to do and what I have been forced to do as a writer from day one is to make a stranger believe me, to make a stranger care about me, about what happened to me and people I love. Those who have not had to do that are unable to write poems of value, poems that can reach another because of their ambivalence, because of the privilege not to care. And so I know that we're speaking in terms of performance in this conversation, but also in terms of writing. I think the pressure to make someone care about what you say to make what you say believable, to make what you say unimpeachable, is a gift that writers of marginalized positions, of diasporic positions, of oppressed positions learn. And that is craft beyond craft to me.
I think Paul speaks for a lot of us. I mean, I've read all of your books, and I know my own work, and I know that all of us are committed to exactly what Paul is describing, which is telling stories about things that happen, which are unbelievable to people who've never been through those things, whether it's sexual violation, violence, trauma, war, refugee experience. My experience as a Vietnamese refugee is, all of our families have been through horrifying experiences, but it's something we all share. So it's completely, normal. If you didn't go through these things, it's weird. But then if you talk to people who are not refugees, they're like, what? This is totally bizarre to their worldview, right? And then we're not even getting to the things that Paul is talking about in terms of sexual violence, which marks, other works that some of you have written as well. And I really wanted to have a conversation with all of you about the content of your poetry as well, about these issues of trauma, violence, violation of privacy, intimacy, and revealing these kinds of things through the art. But we're almost out of time. I want to leave Diana with the last word before we take the break to wrap us up here about all these issues. I mean, all these really important issues that are so personal, so poetic, so intimate, so public, all at the same time.
Okay. No pressure. I think there's so much wisdom that was shared through the crafting of that question by Bao and what Cathy and Paul have shared already. And I think what I will add is, regardless of how you identify and what you survived and what you lived through, there is this other aspect within poetry, and it's like vessel moving performance, which is you can enact an emotional experience through tonality, regardless of content. And I think fiction doesn't do that, right? Like, fiction is plot driven, usually, right? Experimental fiction aside, this is not a gauntlet throwdown.
We're having a beef right now between poetry and prose, but go ahead.
I have no beef with prose. I'm writing actually prose only right now. But there is something, again, like the non-textual, right? The musicality of the language, which can confer the experience, regardless of what you have survived and lived through, that I think connects us, right? Moves us, and binds us together. So I just wanted to add that aspect too, that can occur in performance.
Thank you so much for all of your insights, for sharing your experiences, your emotions, your vulnerabilities with us. We're going to have more time to talk about all of this after the break. An audience, by the way, this is your chance after the break to ask questions. I know some of you are clamoring to hear the poets read poems, so that's something that we'll talk about during the break in the virtual green room. But come ready, audience, with your questions for the poets, either on what we've talked about, things we haven't talked about, but also about the poems themselves. We have really not yet gotten a chance to talk about the poems and the books of our poets. Now we're going to take, I believe, a 10-minute break. DJ Puzzle will entertain us while we are refilling our glasses, and we'll see you back here soon.
Mistress lost down behind. What a love, it was divine. Soon found out I was losing my mind. Seemed like the real thing, I was so blind. Mucha mistrust left on behind.
losing and I'm feeling fine. Love is so confusing, there's no peace of mind. If I fear I'm losing you, it's just no good. You teasing like you do. What's our love? It was a gas. Staring down at deep in the ass. Seemed like the real thing, but I was so blind. Would you mistrust? Left all behind.
All right. How's everyone doing so far tonight? How you doing, Puzzle? I don't know if we can. Oh, you good? You good? You chilling? I see you. Okay. Welcome back, everyone, from the break. Just gonna reiterate, show DJ Puzzle some love if you like the beats. Some folks dropped some links in the chat, so go ahead and follow the chat. This is what we have next is I think one of our favorite parts of the night, which is the introduction of, ooh, that's not the right slide. The introduction of the live auction. So in the chat, on all of the places where the chat is, we dropped the link to the auction, but I'm going to go over the rules really quickly. And some of y'all in the chat also talked about, possibly wanting to hear some of the poets perform. And as we were in the green room, what did y'all think? Are y'all down to perform? Yeah? Yeah, I think we are. If we reach a certain fundraising threshold. So as for folks that might not know, the Accented program and Accented IRL is also serving as a fundraiser for the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network, or DVAN, to make sure that we can share our narratives with the world, right, in the diaspora. So some of the auction items that have been graciously donated by our guests for tonight's show are here listed on the screen. We've got a bunch of signed copies of books. How the auction works is that it's a general auction, right? So just going to go to the rules. If you want to bid in the auction, what you'd want to do is in the whatever chat you're looking at on Facebook or on YouTube, you'd state your name, and then you would commit to an amount that you'd want to bid, right? So let's say me, I'm Philip, I bid $50. And then after you make that commitment to bid, what you'll need to do is go to the bit.ly link, donate to DVAN, and then donate whatever amount of money you bid for. We'll have staff members that are screening the chat to make sure that everything lines up and we count your bid. They'll be keeping account if we reach the magical fundraising number, which is I think $1,000 total for the show. Then each of the poets tonight will read a piece at the end of the show, right? So we'll drop this information in the chat, follow that bit.ly link, and that's how the auction will work tonight. And so another part of the Accented show, that's a regular part of the Accented show, is that we do a book spotlight with our Diacritics editor, Eric Nguyen, who is, let me just pull up Eric, who is the editor of the Diacritics blog, which you can see on dvan.org. He's also the author of the forthcoming novel, Things We Lost to the Water, and he'll actually be featured on the Accented IRL show soon. So Eric, I'll pass it over to you. Oh, you're muted, Eric.
Can everyone hear me? Hi, I'm Eric Nguyen. I'm the editor-in-chief of Diacritics, the blog of DVAN. We publish creative writing, essays, interviews, and more about writers in the Southeast Asian diaspora. I'm also the author of the forthcoming novel, Things We Lost to the Water, and that's coming out May 4th from Knopf. This month, I'm recommending The Magic Fish. It's a graphic novel, a coming out story, a refugee story, both framed by fairy tales by Chung Lei Wing. The story follows Tien, a teenager coming into his own sexuality and struggle to bridge the language gap between his mother and himself to explain his identity. Meanwhile, Tien's mother's memories of her escape from Vietnam resurface as she makes a trip back for a funeral. Technically told and magnificently illustrated, this is a story about the love between parent and child, and the stories we tell and retell to better understand our stories, understand our world and ourselves. It's a perfect book for teenagers or anyone who has ever been one. It's The Magic Fish by Chung Lei Wing.
Thanks so much. Eric. All right, let's bring I just brought everyone back. Welcome back, everyone. I think this is the part where we do some question and answer, right? So hope y'all are ready for that. Let's check to these comments. It's a little bit different because we're not using Zoom, and so we don't have the Q&A function. But for everyone that's out there watching right now, if you have any questions for any of the poets and or Viet tonight, please drop them in the chat, and then we'll bring them up. until then, let's see, who do we got? Let's see, I'll answer this one. It says to bid in the Zoom chat, but can we bid in the Facebook chat? Yes, please bid in the Facebook chat.
I was muted, so I was going to say I have a bunch of questions already lined up. So while we're waiting for the audience to queue up questions, let me trot out the first one. I mean, it just continues from the conversation we were already having before the break, which is all of your work shares something in common in terms of. By the way, Paul is not here. Is he?
Oh my gosh, Paul, where?
There he is. Okay, all right, there he is. Your styles are all very different. Okay. But one thing you all share is in your own different ways, you've all dealt with trauma, violence, violation in different kinds of degrees. And I think that that's really difficult to do. So that's a big question. And I see that Danny actually has come up with a question, our resident librarian from San Jose. I'm going to hold that trauma question in reserve in case we need it, but I want to make sure we go to the audience since you've heard a lot of me talking. So Danny's question is, what have you enjoyed the most about meeting other Vietnamese writers from the diaspora over the years?
I can jump in. Is this for someone in particular?
Yes, everybody, for everybody. Please jump in, free for all.
Yes.
Don't wait for me.
Get organic with it.
So for me, I remember being an undergraduate student or just a young person, and my diasporic writers that I knew were my parents, meaning they don't write, but they're storytellers. And so that's where I gathered so much of how I just learned so much about storytelling, and they're communal storytellers. So, one person's memory fills in for another, and their stories, when they tell them, they weave together in a beautiful way. But I think when I went away to college, I became lonely for that. And looking in the library stacks, I just never got to see anything like what they were telling published anywhere. And so, not to say that wasn't in existence, but it wasn't in the library, the Reed College library, whatever. It wasn't there for me. And so meeting other diasporic writers, Viet writers from the diaspora, has made me feel just not only less lonely, but it's just given me fewer of the Viet sweats, meaning like feeling like I have to carry my parents' stories on their own. I love being able to have somebody else fill it in, and then it's like a burden has been lifted from me. The burden of representation, right, has been lifted from me. So as over the years, I just feel like more and more we are able to not just deepen the conversation, but just I have people who can just be like, oh, like this is like a hilarious conversation, right? It's like, oh, I've been disowned by my family. Oh, I too have been disowned by my family. And it's like this wonderful Viet writer support group of people who kind of understand this thing where, like when we're talking about being in a circle where, nobody can believe that this happens, right? It's like, well, yeah, this happens. Like, so I have this story, it's real life, where after an incident, my dad just, self-flagellated himself with a plumbing snake. This was 5 years ago. This is not, I was living at home and he like whipped himself. And so I tell other people and they feel like this, like totally like out of bounds. But I talk to my Vietnamese friends and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Like there's something really heartening about not feeling so alien. So that that's like all of it. It means so much to me.
I want to jump in on that, which is there's a different way in which you feel seen, right? Cathy, you shared that story about your father self-flagellating, I don't have that story, but I have what I hold about my parents and what I thought was aberration growing up, right? Which contributed to my complicated feelings about family and home. And then when I meet other, not just only Vietnamese writers, but just like Vietnamese humans in the world, in various parts of the world,
And then like, I remember one time I was speaking with a young woman who's an engineering student in Washington State. And she was telling me about her father, who was a boat person, right, who came via boat, and how she was late to this event that we both met at, because her father has this habit of hiding the keys in the house for safety, but he doesn't remember where he hides them. And she had to go, but she couldn't find her keys. And she got angry at her dad. She's like, "Dad, where are my keys?" And he's like, "I don't know." And I was like, my mother does this, you know? And then we were like, our parents are not alone in the singular, I don't know, like symptom of what they have survived. My mother was also a boat person. And we didn't know because we hadn't talked to anybody else who had been through that in this way. And for both this young engineering student and myself, you know, like a second generation, was like, oh, it's not just our parents being crazy, right? It's like symptomatic of a larger refugee experience. And it was a way, it's not alien. We're not alone. And also like more sympathy to parents, you know, like, okay, I'm going to be late for work. I cannot comprehend what it was like for what you went through. I'll end there.
Other folks want to hop in on this question? Okay, I've got one queued up from Khoi Nguyen. She's wondering if anyone here has struggled with communication with the elders or telling their and thus your stories in a language that isn't theirs. Do y'all just plug in language words when necessary? And I think this is how do we get rid of those Viet sweats that Cathy's talking about, right? I feel them right now. Like, I hope my mom doesn't see me sweating like this on camera, but maybe Bao, Paul? Oh, let me bring it back up.
I don't know if I can answer that question directly, but I can answer the question, the part of the question that is telling their stories and yours in a language that isn't theirs. I feel a lot of shame that I'm able to write poetry in English that I feel is honest to my experience because my mother cannot read or write in English. That I can tell about how I grew up, about what happened to me, about what she did, her incredible achievements and her shortcomings, because it's not in a language she understood. And for a long time, I felt really safe being queer and trans on the internet because she is not someone who can use the computer, because she doesn't know how to, surf the web. And in part, the selfishness allowed me to be honest. The selfishness allowed me to write the poems I needed to write for myself. And I'm actually really afraid of what will happen when she holds my book in her hands. I'm really afraid of what will happen when she asks me to translate to her what I have written about us. I will say then that in graduate school, I was very lucky to study with teachers who taught me the principles of lyric indirection, how we can say something without precisely talking about it. Some people do this through metaphor. Some people do this through what we call objective correlatives, right? When you write about a tree, but the poem is not really about a tree, so on and so forth. But I found the challenge of writing and of becoming a writer that much more augmented, because I wanted to write poems that I could translate to my mother and write poems that were honest, that were about what I wanted to say, all at the same time. And on a much more simpler level, I'm telling stories she does not want to be told. Family secrets, dirty laundry, whatever. And so I don't know. I have hurt her in more ways than I can imagine. And I know that I will continue to hurt her with my choice of being a poet who writes about my life.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. And I think before I mean, instead of pivoting to someone else to answer the question, I'm just going to jump to this question from Kimmy, who asks if there's a way we can get a sneak peek of your forthcoming book, or at least what themes and topics you're exploring. And I know that we have a video queued up, so if we wouldn't mind, I'll toss up this video. It's going to be on Twitter, so if it lags, my bad. Okay, here we go.
He said, "Let there be light." And I thought I was the light. I was a man's failed imagination.
All right, thanks for that. Paul, would you want to share a little bit about what's coming up for you?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Kimmy, for that question. The first book is called All the Flowers Kneeling, and it emanates from the experience of being raped at 21 as a junior in college. The word rape is not used anywhere in that book, and the word trauma is not used anywhere in that book. I think this relates to the previous question about meeting other Vietnamese writers. I was really, really lucky to meet Cathy Linh Che. I don't know, let's say a month after what happened to me. And she was working on Split at the time. And in my workshop at Kundiman was also Ocean Vuong. And let's say 2 years later, after that experience, I got to work on an interview with Viet Nguyen. I got to meet Bao Phi, and just Diana was the last person I saw before quarantine. These Vietnamese writers in my life have written books that made me feel less alone, and also challenged me, because what did I have to say that their writing had not? And so for this book, All the Flowers Kneeling, it is not about rape. It is not about trauma. It is about survival. It is about whether or not knowledge is enough for our survival. And what I mean by knowledge is the knowledge that my life has value? Is the knowledge that the future is unpredictable, endlessly possible, that I can have a beautiful life, that I could love again, that I could trust another person enough to convince me that survival is worthwhile an endeavor. It folds into its story my mother's experience as a rape survivor, something she tries not to talk about, but also encourages me to write about so that her story is known, and how we both survive in different ways. My mother, who changes the story of her trauma all the time, who does not want to talk about it, and myself, who wants to face the past squarely. I can't say more than that, but I will say that there are, the book was completely rewritten in the last year, and there are some poems that are going to come out this year, one of which is a invented form called the Hydra in 13 parts. And I don't know, I'm just really excited for it to be done and to be in the world.
Thank you so much for that, Paul, for sharing with us. 2022 looks like we'll have to wait a while more until we get a hold of it, and then we bring you back on the Accented show, right? For everyone, I have a question from Sophia. We're talking about poetics and language, and Vietnamese being a monosyllabic language too. There's so much punch that is resonant with each and every word. So when you all write and think, is it in Vietnamese or in English? And does it shape your sentiment or understanding of your work or each word? Thanks, Sophia, for this question. Are any of y'all like, who learned how to speak Vietnamese first?
I did.
I also did.
Yeah. Vietnamese is my first language. But I think in English now. And I want to hear Bao.
I ain't got nothing.
I choose you.
I think, you know, like I write and think in English. My Vietnamese language skills have deteriorated, you know, as I've gotten older. So I think in English. Yeah.
Bao, do you want to mention that you and I are in a Vietnamese language group together?
Yes,
you know,
we
we're
are
doing our best here. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about pressure and Viet sweats. Yeah. But yeah, I speak in English. Yeah. You know. Yeah. So that's all I have to say. I don't know if I can talk about the family thing. That question. You know, I tend to be very protective of my parents. It's almost like the way that it's kind of an echo of what many of my fellow writers here have said before. It's we do tell these stories that you feel like your parents like tell you, you know, they want you to know so that you can pass it on, right? But there's some stuff I just feel so protective of them, you know, because I mean, I feel like that generation, like my parents, working class Vietnamese refugees, right? They're so invisible, and they're so invisible until they're hated, and in which case they're hyper visible, right? We're seeing that now with so much, you know, anti-Asian hatred directed towards our elders. That I tend to be very protective of them, and it's always a negotiation of what stories do we tell? It feels like Paul was intimating. I carry a tremendous amount of guilt, right, of writing in English, and so the way that I try to honor that is to be very, very careful, you know, and as respectful as possible. So,
I wanted to say that I write and think in English, but there are certain things that I don't translate into English. If it's something that my mom says and it has to be said that way, I keep it in Vietnamese. And the other thing I want to chime off on just really quickly, I don't want to take up so much space, is just I think a lot about this, about writing about my family when, you know, I've been disowned or you know, just more recently, I found out both of them voted for Trump, and it's been very difficult for me to, you know, navigate that emotionally. And to also, I always felt so of my family. And now that we're growing up, it's the natural process of growing up into my artistic self and then writing insistently about my family, but not feeling like I'm sharing a life with them in the same way. So it feels somehow like a betrayal to be writing about them as subjects and to not have the relationship as family that internally I feel like I should have in order to do that responsibly. So I admire the way that Bao does that. And yet I feel like I can't do, you know, I have to be true to myself too. So I feel what Paul is talking about as well. And Diana and I actually had a conversation as part of a dialogue dialogue project. And so much of it was just how challenging it is to really be true to yourself artistically, and then to think about your interrelation with your family, what, you know, wanting to tell the truth, understanding. I think I have sort of accepted that I feel like it's complicated, but I feel like it's a truth that it's also my story to tell. But it's also difficult to know what to do with kind of emotionally when your family isn't sort of, you know, I love my family and they love me, but we're not the same people anymore. So how do you say things if they don't want you to say them? Or how do you say things that critique them when you love them? So that's a big part of it for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cathy, for sharing that. And I think that really segues well into this question that we got from Tanya of the events that happened just as recent as last month during this insurrection, right? So Tanya asked us about what we think about what your role is as Vietnamese diasporic poets in communicating across and against these divides, particularly, when we saw the juxtaposition of the Vietnamese hair, the yellow flag with the 3 red stripes, right? Against the backdrop of the Capitol being stormed by these pro-Trump supporters and this, white supremacist movement. And so, I mean, I'm thinking about how, for this program, Accented, we've also had these kind of conversations with different politicians. We worked with Pivot before, we worked with UNAFSA, trying to bridge this multi-generational, intergenerational gap. But what role, I guess, do you see yourselves and your art in hopefully bridging this connect? Or is there a way to bridge it?
I mean, I think with some people there is, and some people there isn't. I think that these things that we're alluding to, I want to be careful here, because I think that there's certain narratives about Vietnamese people that have truth to them, but are also not the whole truth. Even those people who have threatened to do me and my family harm, which are a particularly virulent, very vocal, very organized anti-communist faction that have threatened my family, and I know have threatened other people. Even in so saying, I'm not a vindictive person, right? And I don't think we should be vindictive. I do think that sometimes folks on that side of the aisle, whatever you want to call it, you can talk to them and you can have a conversation and hopefully change minds. And sometimes you can't, because there are people, and I think that this is actually people in general. There are some people who are not willing to see you as an alternate opinion, or even as a human being in some cases. It's very difficult. And of course, I would want to, and I've had brush-ins with certain segments of people that, I mean, gosh, I'm making a mess of this. Maybe I actually am going to shut up, because I think I have to think about this more before I say anything. I'm sorry.
Maybe we'll pass this one over to Viet, because I know you had that op-ed, Viet. And I know Twitter was very divided. The Vietnamese Twitter was divided about what you said in your op-ed too, so.
Yeah, people hate me all the time, and I get it from the left and the right wing, so it's all good. It's what can I say? I mean, we're here as a community where everybody on the screen is Vietnamese American, and many people in the audience are Vietnamese Americans, and even if you're not, you're sympathetic to, I think, Vietnamese American and Southeast Asian issues and the historical and cultural issues that we're talking about, and the role of the community and the family is very important to us. We want to be able to speak on behalf of people. We want to speak to people with whom we share certain kinds of assumptions and values, and that is in tension with what I think of as the other, really important element of art of any kind, especially poetry and fiction, which is our commitment to truth and to values that do not necessarily align with a community. So what happens when these two things are in contradiction? Like, the majority of a community wants one thing, but your sense of truth and value leads you in another direction. And I think that the last few months of 2020 really reached fever pitch of that, at least in my experience. My Facebook page had some 93,000 people on it. I had very, vigorous conversations on that page with a lot of people, a lot of supporters, but then a lot of people who really strongly disagreed with me. Got a lot of very personal attacks, as Bao was also describing for himself. So we all have to make that choice. And I think for me, I'm a strong advocate for a Vietnamese and a Vietnamese American and diasporic community, but I will cut that off if I think people are wrong. And I think that for me, it was not a matter of both sides during the last part of 2020, or even really the last 4 years. For me, it was really a decision that there are things that I think are right and things that I think that are wrong, and I will criticize the positions of the people that are wrong, including other Vietnamese people, and that unfortunately led to a lot of bad blood. There's no, in some circumstances, there is not the possibility of reconciliation. Maybe we can talk about it later down the line in the future, but in this is what politics is partly about. And you know, for those of us who lived through the period of the war and its aftermath, it's really bitter, because when we look back to the period of the war in Southeast Asia and all the various countries that were involved, it was the same issue, much more aggravated, of both sides or all sides believing that they were right, and the bitter ramifications of that lasted for a long time. I have no easy answers on this issue. You know, sometimes you have to fight, and if you don't want to fight, you have to back off and retreat to another space.
Okay, and then I agree with everything you said, and I think if I can just add something, you know, one thing that I've been pondering is that maybe because I'm a Vietnamese person who has lived through what we have been talking about, that it makes me very weary of any type of dichotomous thinking and polemic thinking. It has made me wary of any "you're with us or against us" thinking, no matter what side of the political spectrum it comes from. You know, as a Vietnamese person, we've seen that. We've seen as Vietnamese people, we've lived through the contradictions of that. And I'm not saying that means we should take a centrist, moderate approach. That's not it at all. That is not it at all. Like Viet and others have said, we all have to make a stand, and some people are not going to come with you when you make that stand. But I'm also weary of the way sometimes conversations happen in the public sphere these days, where each side very much kind of becomes like, no, like, this is my position, and if you do not agree with this position, then you are against everything. And I think that is a dangerous climate, and I think that has something to do with Vietnamese people living through that in our history repeatedly.
I'll just add, that's why I deleted my Facebook page of 93,000 people, because I just couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, and I think the spiciest conversations happen in those like Người, Việt, like insert city here groups, right? Where everyone's just like, I don't know where everyone has all this time to just bicker with each other on Facebook. But yeah, I think, you know, to what you said, Bao, like being Vietnamese is paradoxical, it's contradictory. And, you know, when we think of being Vietnamese in dichotomies, we like fall ill to thinking about like being the model minority, or being what is, you know, exactly what the model minority is not, right? And it's either or, and there isn't a lot of room for nuance, which I think, you know, we need, right? This diversity of narrative, this narrative plenitude. And so with that, I mean, we've already like passed time, so I don't know how y'all are feeling so far. We were just letting it go on.
Love it.
But I mean, where do we go with this? So for everyone that's in the chat that's still with us, the 120 plus of y'all that are still here watching us, about 2 hours in now, the longest accented show ever. If y'all, you know, I'm just gonna throw up this this banner, donate to Divan. This is my pitch for y'all, so that we can keep putting on this show. You know, we've been so grateful to the Smithsonian APA Center for being a co-sponsor for this series of Accented IRL, or in real life, which is a combination of the Accented Dialogues and Diaspora program that Divan does, and the Heritage IRL, or in real life program that the Smithsonian does. And so all of this series of shows that we're putting on this spring are all free, and they're all going to be on our Facebook Lives, right? But at the same time, we want to be able to commit to our mission of supporting cultural producers, supporting writers, supporting poets, artists in the diaspora. And so I'm gonna just toss up this slide really quickly. So if y'all want to see more, definitely this is the plug. This is our lineup that we have for spring 2021. Events are going to be happening. This is the first one. Our next one is going to be at the beginning of April on the 9th. We'll have a show on the 30th of April, which is, y'all know, is a significant day. And then we'll close out the Accented IRL series in May, during APA Heritage Month. So please, I mean, this is the final pitch from me. If y'all could donate to Divan, you know, get those signed copies of books, because it's really hard to get signed copies of books right now. You know, like no one's really doing book signings. So this is your chance, you know, to get some really limited edition copy type of stuff from poets whose work I admire, and I know that y'all admire too. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Viet, for your if you have a final question.
No, dude, I like I said, I keep promising we want to talk about the poetry. So I have questions for all of our poets about their poetry. You know, I've been reading, you know, Bao for a long time, and I read Paul this week just to make sure I caught up with the newest work that's out there. So I wanted to talk about each of your work. So let's start with I was going to reverse, you know, and so Paul, let's start with you. I love the book, All the Flowers Kneeling, and I think it's really it's good. It's really unique in the landscape of Vietnamese American literature. If we just talk about that category that your work falls into, I haven't seen anything like it before. But I just want to talk about one poem out of all of those, the Santa Ana. I just thought that was awesome. And I think, number one, I know what the Santa Ana is since I lived in Southern California. But number two, the rhythm of that poem really just differed from a lot of what was happening in the rest of the collection, the rhythm, the vocabulary. And it's a little bit hard because the rest of the audience hasn't read or seen that poem. But I'm just kind of curious about the creative process. We've talked a lot about the audience, the performance, and so on. But the writing of the poem, I assume, is a very private experience for many of you. How did that poem come about? You know, can you lead us through that as some sort of representative of your writing process and what you were thinking at the time?
Yes. I'm really glad you picked that poem. It's the poem from which the title of the book emerges. The poem ends, "I want all the flowers kneeling." And I will say that the poem began as a prompt from my teacher, Mary Jo Bang. She wanted me to write a poem wherein I did not know what was going to happen. And this prompt came about through a chorus of criticism, yes, but also encouragement from my three teachers in graduate school, Mary Jo Bang, Carl Phillips, Francine J. Harris, who asked me, you know, did I grow up as a child of refugees? And as that child, did I feel the need to translate? Did I feel the need to accompany my mom to the food stamp office or the doctors and know the answers to everything? And I said, yes. Did I feel the need to be superior to others in school in order to pave a way for myself out of the poverty that we were in? And I said, yes. And they said that need to know, to be certain, permeated my poems. And so what I was writing were not real poems, because what I learned in school is that poems have to reach through the unknown. They have to discover and enact the discovery of something that the poet did not know before. I didn't know how to write poems. I thought I was a poet for a long time, but what I wrote, I look back on now and I'm not sure. I'm really not sure it was poetry. And so the prompt that Mary Jo gave me was to write a poem where I did not tell a story, but instead followed sound. And so the first version of the Santa Ana began. And that's the version that can be found online. The version of the Santa Ana that you know is 3 pages long. I think it was 4 pages at one point. And it was the last poem that I put in my thesis to graduate from school. And I remember my thesis defense meeting being primarily about that poem because my teacher said any poem with itchy clit as the third line that runs for 3 pages made him lift his eyebrow, but he was pleasantly delighted by where it ended up. The poem uses a lot of wordplay, a lot of sound play, and for me, every formal decision in a poem comes out of an emotional or psychological imperative. It has to. If it doesn't, then the poet is just playing, and I have no time for other people's play. My time is invested in my survival and the survival of the people I love. So when I read poems, there has to be a reason why the poem is written that way. For me, this poem, the Santa Ana, it's playfulness, it's puns, it's bombasticness. I feel like I say the word bitch 12 times in this poem. It comes right at the moment in the book when the speaker of the book is trying to assert that despite everything that has happened to them, they will be as ferocious and as daring as the Santa Ana winds that cause, unfortunately, the wildfires in California. For me, growing up, California was an unchanging place. I ran away from it at 18 because I felt like no one understood me and nothing about the place I was in was going to change. The only thing that changed the landscape that I could count on was this wildfire every year. Unfortunately, it displaced people. It caused great harm. But I identified with it. And the poem harnesses the destruction, the unpredictability of that fire through sound. I could not anticipate where sound took me, in the way that one could not anticipate the direction of the fire. One could not anticipate that this invisible wind would cause it. And I learned through writing that poem how to follow language towards discovery. I never imagined I would say I wanted all the flowers kneeling, but I did.
I think it's really important, you know, that when I write, oftentimes I'm carried away by what it is that I'm writing. So there's a way in which the language takes over, the rhythm and the voice and all of this. And, you know, I really feel sorry for our audience that they cannot see what I'm seeing on the Kindle screen. You know, any poem where the second line is head bitch and the third line is itchy clit. That's the entirety of these lines is a poem that I want to read. All right. And we're $300 away from our $1,000 fundraising goal. So maybe, you know, it's up to the audience, you know, whether we get to hear some of these lines or not. Bao, you know, and I know that we said we were talking about poetry, but, you know, you've made a really interesting transition, not a transition, but you've added the other skill now of being a children's book writer with 3 children's books under your belt. I've written 1. And I thought that was the closest I got to actually writing poetry, you know, like from writing 400-page novels to writing like 50 lines or something for the children's book. I'm wondering if you found some relationship between what you did as a poet and what you're doing as a children's book writer.
Thank you. And I'll be brief because I know I've talked a lot tonight. Yeah, I think one of the tools that I bring as a poet to children's book writing is brevity, right? Like you don't have a lot of space. It's almost like writing in a poetic form. You have 32 pages. You have to keep, and then from spoken word and performance, I bring like an awareness of who the audience is who will be reading this, right? And just very quickly, what I'll say is what I love about writing for children is that there's no chauvinism when you say you're writing to children, right? I think sometimes, you know, adult writers, they can get kind of snooty when you say that you're writing towards an audience, which, you know, first of all, I think that's bullshit. But, you know, like there's that kind of snootiness, like, oh, you should write out to the universe and, you know, you should write for yourself or whatever, these kind of like Eurocentric, very male notions of writing. And they can be adult writers can be very snotty if you bring up the idea of writing for an audience. But if you are an author writing for kids and you are not thinking of audience, you're dead. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to get anywhere. And kids are brutally honest. If you bore them, I mean, the joke I make is I was a spoken word artist for 2 decades. I performed in front of like hostile drunk people. I performed in front of community, thousands of people in prisons, in schools and everything. And nothing terrified me more than reading in front of small children. You know, like what I like about writing for kids is that you have to know who your audience is. You have to think about them and you have to think about where they're at and how to engage them. And I feel like that's a tool that I bring as a spoken word artist and a longtime performer.
I totally agree. I am that snotty adult who say I write for myself, but in children's books, I had to, like, for example, go and read the children's book that Ellison and I did to his 2nd grade class. I was like, these kids are going to tear me apart alive if I don't entertain them. You know, that's a very different experience. Thank you to Fat Bar, who got us to the $1,000 mark. We will hear some poems tonight. That doesn't leave the rest of you in the audience off the hook. We still need your support to make Accented happen, to make Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network happen, to make Diacritics happen. You know, poetry's not free, people. I mean, the poets tear the poems out of their heart and their soul, but otherwise we still need an infrastructure for poetry. So please be generous. But Diana, you're next here. I'm trying to go reverse alphabetically. Diana, you're next here. And I was really struck in Ghost of, your book, that besides words, you're also deploying experiments with typography and photographs as well, which you adjust or amend in different ways. What was the thinking there in introducing these other elements into Ghost of?
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't have considered this other form of semiotic, right? Like the image or just kind of defamiliarized text, if it wasn't like just like working with the artifacts of my family. So if folks are not familiar, in content warning here, just talking about suicide, 2 years before my brother committed suicide, he excised himself with an X-Acto knife out of family photographs, and we in the family didn't talk about those photographs, and they were still hanging on the walls of our house. And just as a personal, like writing for just myself, attempt to reverse that valency, wanting to repair the archive, right? And which is also another way of saying, like, of entering into a space of silence my family failed to talk about. So the choice to engage via typography, to engage with photographic archive was just so personal for me. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And actually, as I was doing it, it like unleashed all of these feelings and moved me through time to think about not only my brother's experience growing up in that house, but mine. And then also like what made our parents before they became parents to us. I don't even know if what I'm saying makes sense to folks here, but I think this is kind of harks back to the conversation earlier about how to communicate if you're multilingual or in between languages. Like Vietnamese was my first language, except I didn't know that until I watched home videos where I'm 4 and I'm speaking fluently in the Southern dialect, which I am not able to do now. So now actually I'm trying to reacquire the Vietnamese language because it was also forbidden from my home because my parents were fearful that I'd be ESL, right, when I entered into kindergarten, which is a complicated relationship to the Vietnamese language. But my parents are also actually quite literate in English, and they're both computer programmers, very specific sector, right, of engineering. So they're on the internet and they can read what I write, which is to say, how do I transmute my experience if I know also that my parents can find this material, and sometimes engaging in this other level of communication through the photograph, through reparation of the silence, the gaps and the distances within the family, my family. Through typography, like that's I talked earlier about nonverbal, like that is also another way of communicating. So yeah, thank you for that question, Viet.
Of the pages I'm talking about, Philip? Otherwise, I can just hold up my book and you can see what I'm talking about here. This is terrible, But anyway, Diana puts in photographs of her. I'm doing a terrible job. Family, which she also cuts up and then plays with words and the arrangement of words on the page.
Wait, Viet, I got you.
You got it. Okay.
Yeah, hold on. We got it. Boom. Y'all see that? Ooh. Dana, if you want to narrate this.
Oh yeah, unexpected. So this is something I'm working now, which is archives from my mother. And so this is actually a photograph that I redacted, but less of a redaction. I've been thinking about Tina Komp, the scholar, and her thinking about diasporic photography, but she's working in the Black diaspora. But she talks about how can we attune ourselves to the vibrational present when we encounter the quotidian photograph. And when I look at this photograph of my 2 eldest uncles, and my mother is the one on the left, and my older aunt is the one on the right, I'm struck by how the hands hold, but are also in contest, right? Which is to say, like, what I know of my uncles, not of this picture, I wasn't there, I know of these uncles as grown men with children who continue to compete with each other. And this photograph serves as documentation of how long-standing that feud is, right? Like, so thinking about sibling ties and so forth. So yeah, I'm like now deep diving through archive because it's rich for me personally. I'm not going to read this. Oh God. Yeah. But you can at least see the zoomed in, the hands. And that's my mama. I hope she's not here right now.
So all of us who fled from countries, I think, understand the power of archives and photographs because our families brought some of those pictures with them, and so many others were lost and had to be recovered. So the photograph, especially the black and white one, is so incredibly important to refugees. Just want to thank Khoi Nguyen, Shelby Perkins, and Baby Khoi Jacobs for their contributions. Khoi in particular took my author photograph for the last couple of books. Thank you so much. And let's end before we get to the readings with Cathy. In Split, your book, you make brief mention of the fact that your parents, who were refugees, ended up cast in Apocalypse Now as extras, which is, on the one hand, kind of awesome, and on the other hand, must be really kind of strange. And I believe that you are working on a new project on that experience of your parents.
I am. So I have a draft that's pretty much completed of a poetry manuscript about this. And I also have a creative nonfiction manuscript. So this is just a photo of my dad when he was younger, but you can sort of read the quote. Just what brought me to writing poetry early on was the desire to record my parents' stories of living through the Vietnam War. I saw it as a kind of recovery project and a proactive way to insert their narratives into the dominant narrative of the war. They were paid as extras to become different characters playing Viet Cong, the exact people they were running from. They became POWs, translators. My mom had to shoot a fake gun into the air. So speaking of, she was 22 years old. We start with Amanda Gorman, standing on the inaugural stage. My mom plays like a character completely opposite of, herself, the person she's running, the people she's running from. She has to don this suit on, and instead of being the person running from the violence, is like it's actually really fascinating because she's shooting up at American helicopters. There's something about that I find very heartening. Like, it's a kind of revenge of some kind. So in 2015, you'll see in the screen, so these are just family photos of my parents, and that's me and the red Ao Yai, right? But in 2015, I returned to Vietnam, and I went to the Philippines to the site of where it's a town called Baler that is in the Philippines, where the famous napalm scene in Apocalypse Now was filmed. And my parents and the 100 refugees from that camp were hired specifically for the famous napalm scene. So, I went to what they call Charlie's Point and took up that photograph that's on the left side and kind of juxtaposing it to, Charlie's Point with the helicopters on the right side. So, the poetry book is in many ways, it's a recovery project. It's a way to think about, and there's collages in there as well, as a way of thinking about, how do you take back the narrative of marginalization by moving the lens from the storytelling of, Francis Ford Coppola, who's very interested in telling the story of American California GIs that surf, in the ocean. And it's so funny because, we grew up in California, and really inserting their voices. So there's a lot of persona poems, and there's a lot of interviews that I've taken, and I've been interested in this. I've been using Terrence Hayes' form which is called The Golden Shovel, and it's used to pay homage to the poet Gwendolyn Brooks. But I've been taking the script apart and sort of filling in my parents' narratives and putting, the pages of the script more into the margins as a sort of way to think about like making Coppola extra himself. So extraneous to my parents' beautiful story. So yes, that's the project I'm working on, and I'm working on creative nonfiction and collage and photographs with that as well. So it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story because it takes up such a huge part of the American imagination about the Vietnam War, and it's also incredible because it's in conversation with your work, Viet, and it's incredible because it's in conversation with so many. It's just, and I like having it all part of the narrative at large. My parents as witness. There's stories about Filipino extras, in the film. There's stories about, all these people, and they form a net of some kind that is important to me. And, I think about power. I don't know what power means, especially as, there's this difficult incident where my dad videotapes himself whipping himself. So there's, he is the auteur of our lives in that way. He is the auteur of our home videos. He's the eye behind our, he's the director who takes the photographs of our family. And I am the I'm the author who is rewriting this as well. So there is this interesting, complicated tangle of power and, wrestling of who gets to tell the story. And this layering, I think it's just a series of questions. I think when I talk about my family, when I talk about, our political views, when I talk about being in conversation with other authors, including everybody here, I think part of it is simply the necessity of asking lots of questions and loving people, like loving my family and their stories and loving myself as well. So I guess that's where I'm coming from when I try to construct this story.
I cannot wait. And I know our audience cannot wait to hear poems from each of you. So, and as I mentioned in the private chat, 2 minutes, people. 2 minutes each. It's really speed poetry we're talking about. I'm really sorry for the audience that we cannot spend more time with our poets doing their poems, but we're really appreciative of the patience of the audience for hanging with us for the entire night for well over 2 hours. It hasn't felt like 2 hours to me anyway, but then I've had a bottle of writer's tears with me. Okay, so we're going to go reverse alphabetical order. We're going to start with Paul. 2 minutes, Paul. What are you going to share with us? Muted.
Paul, you're muted.
I'll read a poem called Bioluminescence. Bioluminescence. There's a dark so deep beneath the sea. The creatures beget their own light. This feat, this fact of adaptation, I could say, is beautiful, though the creatures are hideous. Lantern fish, hatchet fish, viper fish, I, not unlike them, forfeited beauty to glimpse the world hidden by eternal darkness. I subsisted on falling matter, unaware from where or why matter fell, and on the weaker creatures, beguiled by my luminosity, my hideous face opening suddenly to take them into a darkness darker and more eternal than this underworld underwater. I swam and swam toward nowhere and nothing. I, after so much isolation, so much indifference, kept going, even if going meant only waiting, hovering in place, so far below, so far away from the rest of life, the terrestrial, made possible by and thereby dependent upon light. I did what I had to do. I stopped. I killed. I wanted to feel in my body at work, working to stay alive. I swam, kept going, waited, found myself without meaning to, without contriving meaning at the time, in the company of creatures who, hideous like me, had to be their own illumination, their own God, their own Genesis, and often we feuded. Often we fuse like anglerfish, blood to blood, desire to desire. We were wild, bewildered, beautiful in our wildness and our wilderness. In the most extreme conditions, we prove that life can exist. I exist. I am my life, I thought, approaching at last the bottom of the sea. It wasn't the bottom. It wasn't the sea.
Oh man, awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Bao, you're next.
Damn, Paul. Beautiful, thank you. I'm going to speed through this poem. I'm going to read a shortened version of a poem that I wrote when the first rash of anti-Asian violence occurred due to COVID. You can incidentally read a Vietnamese version of this poem translated by Vini Cao. Shout out to Vini Cao for translating it. Here we go. We're going to power through it. Alternate reality. And it instead of imagining revenge against people who commit anti-Asian violence, it's more imagining a world where there is no anti-Asian violence. Instead of a grandmother kicked in her face, 1,000 orchids blooming from each swinging foot, the stems and petals forming a fragrant face mask wrapped around every face, hers and yours. Instead of a man and his child stabbed in the face, the knives turned to pens, sentences flowing like blood as the story of their lives filled the body of flag after flag, embracing the wind from every direction. Instead of acid poured onto a woman, we asked one another what our parents drank when they lost what meant the most to them. The lines on their faces a worn map to the unbearable, so they can find it even when they die. Instead of a nurse being dragged from a train, we all grow wings. There is no net big enough, no handle long enough. Instead of a rock through a store window, there are no stores. We have everything we need and nothing more. Instead of fearing for my mother and father, they are hunched over sewing machines, their stitches even as needles dip up and down, threads tight on the margins, or it all falls apart. They sew masks. They save your life, and so there is no need for me to keep screaming how they saved mine. Instead of you chinks brought the virus here, there is a chorus in a language no one understood but translated as beauty, so loud you were shaken, and you learned the limitations of dancing how you've always been taught to dance. American history books fell off of shelves and burst into flames, and we cooked our dinners for one another, burnt in some places and raw in the other. In the dark, our families' backs are hunched with all they can carry, dodging the spotlight eyes of soldiers, the bark of their guns off leash. They always escape the men with guns. We never forget. Instead of deportation, our bodies become boats. The ocean is impossible to border. Here, mothers don't need dead sons or daughters before they are heard. The doctors and nurses don't need to stand in front of trucks as if they were tanks. We don't need to celebrate a day that a child isn't shot at school because that is every day. The drones drop only bread. The combat boots float meaninglessly over the necks of our fathers. The bigots are too busy with therapy to pay us any mind. The police bullets all miss. The hottest flame is in your kitchen. Lovers are never the chameleon color of bruises. You could lean down close to the face of the dying person whom you love, say goodbye to their very last breath. It is not science, but rather science fiction, that the landmines are not landmines, but seeds. And like flowers bursting from the soil after winter, you are an explosion in bloom. And our elders look at their grandchildren the way a person looks at the rainbow after a tornado has taken their home, bit by bit, away into the very same sky.
Wow. All right, Bao. The landmines are not landmines, but seeds. Amazing. Diana, you're up.
Okay. I'm going to screen share. Okay.
No pressure, no pressure.
I know. It's just like asking me all these questions. I don't even know. Oh boy.
While you're doing
I don't
that,
think it's
just wait.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna work. Okay, it's okay. So I'm continuing to work with the archive, and I'm revisiting these photographs. And now I'm interested in the bodies that survive these photographs. And so I've been composing within that space. So I'm just going to read two bodies, and I'm sorry that I can't show these to you. You'll just have to imagine the shape and the boundaries. Beside Eshu. On this side of language, can I look forward as well as back? As babies in pictures, he and I were twin copies. When I saw him, I saw myself. I saw him in me. In myself, I see our mother now. Here I see two of me simultaneously. And a hand I know as I know my own, deft, and how sure it cuts. Her mother wears a similar frock on her honeymoon, long before her daughter's, long before his death. She stands on these steps, a middle child. What holds her? Who keeps her anchored in space to this place? And I'll describe what I can see on the page, which there's the text in the shape of the mother's body, and then there's the children body texts. And I've actually placed the children's bodies back inside the mother. And then slowly over the progression of the next few pages, the children are removed until the mother is alone. And so I'll end with the mother text. If we accept the camera's record, let it be known how she staged each of us, every gesture. We couldn't say no. Photographs trigger ones not taken, pictures forgotten in our minds. She cannot remember what she has done. What did she do to deserve such wretched children? She knows now she wasn't meant for this, didn't mean to do any of it. Let her undo it. Let it be undone to her, to all of us. The war, how it foreshadows. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. That was very moving. Cathy, we're going to end with you.
Thank you. The poem is called Zombie Apocalypse Now, the Making of. So I was watching a lot of The Walking Dead and thinking about how the zombie apocalypse was in parallel to this idea of people fleeing, fleeing a war wherein life as you know it and the people as you know it suddenly become something entirely different. So it's a new rendering of Apocalypse Now. Zombie Apocalypse Now, the rendering, the making of. Cue soundtrack. The dead include my grandmother, my older sister, my uncle, who was a priest, 4 cousins, still children. They eat the pomelos we set at the altar, all in a circle, peeling the membranes, dropping the segments into each other's mouths. I am the director. The zombies don't look like zombies. Just my grandmother, unable to speak, the flies reanimating, her body's giving up. Just my older sister, all grown now, She was a little VC sacrificed to show the depravity of war. She died and died and died again. I yell cut, and they ascend into heaven. Makeup, I crawl across the set. I ask the artist to bruise the undead. I provide a mood board, artist sketches composed by my brother, happy to paint again. It's a family production. My father fiddles with the Super 8. He shakes his head at the last reel. Too dark. My mother in costume design, her head down at the sewing machine, measuring tape hanging from the curtain. She is burning incense, pouring holy water into the iron. She stitches the tatters and hand helms the silk. She is careful, but we are running low on time. The light is starting to dim. I call down my uncle, my cousins, their faces at the side of the road, the red terror, a tableau. I tell them, here is the script. Act natural. This is just like the story of your lives. Thanks.
That's awesome. I cannot wait for that book to come out. Thanks again to all of our poets for sharing so much of themselves with us tonight. Thanks to the audience for being with us for I believe 2.5 hours. I think we did set a record for the show, but again, it didn't feel like it. Poets, I said this in my piece in Time Magazine about Amanda Gorman. It's true for you too. Poets are our conscience. We would be so less rich without your words, your presence, and your gifts. Thanks again for being here. And let's have the outro from DJ Puzzle. And for the audience, we will see you again at the next episode of Accented IRL.
Radio, like transmission.